नारायण नमस्कृत्यं नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Hare Krishna. So we are continuing our discussion of the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, and we are on chapter 12. It's entitled Creation of the Kumāras and Others. Now, what is to be understood by the process of creation? In reality, what we need to do is we need to have a very simplified view of how to operate in this world. The more simple it is, the greater it would be for us to monitor and for us to ensure that we are on the right track. The more complicated the manifestation of rules, regulations in terms of what we need to do, then the more difficult it becomes because of the fact that some of us or most of us do not have the capacity for complex, I would say, management of life. Most of us don't. So there is a need to choose a very simple but efficient framework and then lead life according to that. And when I say lead life, I'm referring to the fact that for the body is going to be engaged in, depending on the ashram, depending on where we are in terms of life, etc. The body is engaging in eating, sleeping, defending, and then mating according to where we are in what we are situated in terms of life itself. Now, when we talk about eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, this particular chapter particularly delineates some of the risks of being in touch with passion and ignorance. When the Srimad Bhagavatam uses the word Bhadra, which is auspicious, and Abhadra, which is inauspicious, so Nashta Prayeshu Abhadreshu. Nashta Prayeshu Abhadreshu. So what is being destroyed by coming in touch with the potency of Srimad Bhagavatam, by coming in touch with Krishna in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam, what is being destroyed, what is being removed is Abhadreshu, which is nothing but passion and ignorance. Because if you were to come in touch with passion and ignorance, then you are in the material mode of goodness. Even if you are in goodness, the vulnerability of being in touch with passion and ignorance is so high that there's a certain degree of risk of being able to fall down further into degradation, and which is being seen because even if you're very highly situated as a great sage, we read in the Puranas, we read in the Itihasas, we read in the different scriptures of great personalities with great capacity for austerity, great capacity for self-control, great capacity for mystic potency. They all have become extraordinarily vulnerable at different stages. And they all paid the price by practically losing time, because you lose time when you come in touch with vulnerability, because the vulnerability can dislodge you, can throw you away, can practically take you away from a certain path. And then you could just lose years and years by the time you get back. One may say that that's also a part of life, and then you could justify it by saying that, yes, we went through all these experiences, and by doing so, we have become wiser, but it's a risk. It is a risk. So one should endeavor to not needing to take so much time away to experience life, to learn from it. It's better to learn from someone else's experience. It's better to learn from someone else's experience than to go through the same experience, because that's not a very wonderful, intelligent approach to life. Yeah, that's why we come in touch with scripture. Scripture is all about how to live life based on the experiences of great personalities and also the vulnerabilities experienced by them. You're seeing the vulnerabilities of great personalities as well when we go through scripture. And Srimad Bhagavatam is full of such great examples. It's just full of examples of how vulnerable one is when they're in touch with passion and ignorance. Because passion and ignorance are the material modes of nature. They are the external potency of the Lord. And we are tatastha. We are tatastha. As jiva, we are marginal. As a consequence, we are very minuscule. We have very little ability to overcome the effect of the Lord's external energy on our own. We cannot do that. It's almost an impossibility for us to be able to manifest control over the external energy of the Lord, and which is what is being demonstrated over and over again by the failure of great personalities. And these are great rishis. Some of them were extraordinarily potent, and they have contributed immensely to the universe. They have contributed immensely to the universe. So you can't really imagine how much they have contributed in terms of the well-being of the universe, in terms of them being able to give scriptural, I would say manifestations of scripture, them being able to invoke mantras that have practically been the foundation for so many different purposes. It's just unimaginable as to how much they have contributed. But then they've all displayed vulnerabilities. And these vulnerabilities themselves are simply an indication that no matter how powerful one may become, you're still going to be very much in touch with the external potency of the Lord, which is the external potency of the Lord, which means it is Krishna's power. You can't really subdue Krishna's power. You cannot overcome Krishna's power. It's not possible. So as a consequence, the path and the framework has to be chosen pretty early on. Yeah, because there are many objectives one could talk about. We'll go through it in this chapter. Now, there is this objective which is being spoken of Urdhva Reta, which is where the idea of sexual potency, sexual energy being passed upward. And these personalities, practically the Kumāras, because this whole chapter is entitled The Creation of the Kumāras. The Sanat Kumara, Sanandana, the different Kumāras, the 4 Kumāras, the young brahmacharis who are lifelong celibates, they practically had the ability to convert their sexual potency into spiritual power. So the word used here is Urdhva Reta, which practically meant that they had the capacity to push the force of sexuality upward and to capitalize on that force and to use it in the service of the Lord. Now, the point is that it's extraordinarily difficult to do so as an objective. It is extraordinarily difficult to do so as an objective if you were to take it up as an individual objective, where to say that, yes, I want to be able to control myself. I want to repress by particular propensities, and I want to control myself, and then I want to stay controlled and within bound, etc. These are objectives that are very individual, very distinct. You can't really do that because you're up against the external energy of the Lord. You're up against passion and ignorance. You're up against a tremendous amount of stimulation, especially in the Western world, and that is true even in India. There's nothing which is being shown these days in terms of advertising, even in terms of billboards, in terms of whatever you do. You really can't go past anything without an attempt made to physically stimulate the person so that they could practically come in touch with unwanted desires. So this is practically how the world is being designed. Yeah, the world is being designed in such a way that there's tremendous amount of impulse that is being created. And as a consequence, it is also what I would call as a situation which is like a minefield. You can't really have the objective with these particular yuga or during these particular times of wanting to maintain celibacy on its own count. Oh, I want to be a celibate. That can't be the objective. However, what is astonishing to see that where great sages, greatly potent personalities, like for example, sage Vishwamitra, he was the guru of Lord Ram. Do not ever consider that to be an ordinary position. He taught archery, he taught different kinds of weaponry to Lord Ram, and Lord Ram went in his service, you see. So it is not an ordinary position to practically even come in touch with Lord Ram, be a part of Sri Ramayan. Imagine this, being a part of Sri Ramayan, where you open Sri Ramayan and you read about sage Vishwamitra. And then this great personality of Sri Vishwamitra, he had the potency to invoke and bring in the Gayatri Mantra. He practically received and became the teacher of the Gayatri Mantra. So the mantras themselves are given to the sages by Lord Brahma, but then one has to pay the price. So he becomes the Rishi of the Gayatri Mantra. So in the Rig Veda, the Gayatri Mantra of Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Diyo Yonah Prachodayat. That Tat Saviturvarenyam Gayatri mantra, it is given by sage Vishwamitra. Every mantra in the Rig Veda has a rishi, and you need his blessings to chant. Yeah. So you can just imagine that the Gayatri mantra, which is one of the most potent mantras ever, that mantra has a sage, and that sage, great sage Vishwamitra, also had personal association, and he was with Lord Sri Ram, but he had difficulties in managing his senses. He could not manage his senses due to the assault of, the different kind of tests that were imposed upon him by the demigods. He couldn't. He could not really manage the senses. He failed. He regretted the failure. However, the point I'm trying to make is it's fascinating to see that that was just managing his life, and he had the objective of wanting to attain a certain position, and he was performing austerities, and he collapsed under the weight of the external energy. This is an arrangement of the external energy. Do not underestimate the power of external energy. If you're going to have an objective that is not Krishna conscious, we are on our own. We are particularly on our own if you do not have an objective of Krishna consciousness. Now take the example of Srila Haridas Thakur. If you take the example of Srila Haridas Thakur, he never claimed to be a great personality. He considered himself to be a very fallen soul. He considered himself even unfit to visit the Jagannath Mandir. He felt that the Brahmanas who served in Jagannath Mandir would be contaminated by his presence to such an extent that he kind of wanted to stay away from the Mandir. He would pay respects to the Sudarshan Chakra on top of Jagannath Mandir. From a distance, he would pay respects. He would pay obeisances to Lord Jagannath during the Rath Yatra, but then he would not go there. And he was the Namacharya. Lord Chaitanya nominated him as the Namacharya. This is no ordinary circumstance of being nominated the Namacharya of the Yuga Dharma. Okay, so his position was so extraordinary that he was an Namacharya, and he was not Vishwamitra. He was not a great, what I would call as Rishi, who practically had the capacity to instruct Lord Sri Ram, and there were so many different amazing activities. He came from a background that was somewhat compromised in terms of the background which he came from. He came from a background that was not directly Vedic, and he practically felt quite unqualified. But then Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu practically gave him the position of Namacharya because of his qualities. Now, what is it that we noticed with Haridas Thakur? Srila Haridas Thakur was also tested. He did not fail. Srila Haridas Thakur did not fail because for almost 3 nights, he was tested. He was alone. He completely depended on Harinam, and he completely depended on the mercy of Tulsi Maharani. He was taking shelter of Vrinda Devi, and he was chanting Harinam, and he completely depended on the mercy of the Lord and considered himself extraordinarily unqualified and completely depended on the mercy. As a consequence, the mercy was provided, and he was able to overcome what the great sage Vishwamitra couldn't overcome. So this is a lesson. The objective in the case of Srila Haridas Thakur was not to prove himself to be a celibate. It was not to prove himself to be one of great powers. It was not to prove himself to be of someone who could control himself and manifest potency where he would not be disturbed. He was an extraordinarily humble devotee and a chanter of Harinam. He practically lived the example of Trinadapi Sunichena Taurariva Saishnuna. He accepted the fact, Trinadapi Sunichena. Trina is all about being able to be malleable. Trina is all about being able to be what I would call as being able to accept things in life. He accepted his position as coming from a background that was not glorious. He accepted his position of not being a part of Vedic culture by birth. And then he applied that particular principle very strongly by saying, okay, I should not cross over and I should not do things which can violate that particular principle. So he took it upon himself as a blessing. He took it upon himself as a blessing that he could not enter the temples and he could not do this and he could not do that. He just took it as a blessing. He practically said, this is what the Lord has awarded me. He accepted it. This is humility. And then he tolerated everything. And he sat there and he held on to the beads and he chanted Harinam. So this chanting that he did of Harinam protected him. What was the objective of Srila Haridas Thakur? It is the same objective as everyone else in the Yuga Dharma. The Yuga Dharma is to chant Harinam and to attain Krishna Prema. That was the objective. It was not celibacy. So the point I'm trying to make is we cannot overcome material energy by setting objectives other than Krishna consciousness. You cannot set objectives of austerity if they're not useful in you being able to execute Krishna consciousness. You cannot set objectives of celibacy for its own good, because again, that is not what Krishna consciousness is all about. You can only set the objective of Krishna consciousness. If you set the objective of Krishna consciousness, and if you focus on Krishna consciousness, and if you focus on what we would call as the tenets of what is being taught to us to maintain our regulative principles, we maintain our regulative principles for the purpose of chanting Harinam. We are not interested in the regulative principles themselves. We are maintaining the regulative principles because it facilitates our ability to remain in the mode of goodness so that we could call upon Harinam. That is our objective. So if you don't constantly center yourself on the objective of wanting to surrender to Harinam and wanting to chant the Premanam and wanting to attain Premanam, we will not be able to manage the other aspects of our life, which means there really isn't a need for us to set any other objective other than wanting to do what Mahaprabhu is wanting us to do. We just need to remember that, because this is the example set by the Namacharya. This is exactly the example set by Haridas Thakur. He focused on wanting to do what Mahaprabhu wanted him to do. This is pretty much it. He got the protection, because once you depend on Harinam, Harinam will protect us. If you depend on the objective of Krishna consciousness as your sole objective in life, life in itself would become glorious, because everything else will become resolved. Everything else can be resolved. Brahmacharya, maintaining the regulative principles, being able to move forward, all of that falls in place if the objective is Krishna consciousness. But the regulative principles on their own are extraordinarily difficult to maintain in Kali Yuga. If all you have is just regulative principles, then that's a miserable life. Because who cares about regulative principles anyways, if you have no objective of Krishna consciousness? We have Krishna consciousness, and we want to do very well in Krishna consciousness. We want to do very well in our japa. We want to do very well in our service. We want to facilitate the chanting of Harinam. We want to facilitate the chanting and glorifying of scripture, of glorifying Srimad Bhagavatam, being able to associate. The regulative principles allow us to be able to center and focus our energy on that singular objective. So it is the objective, I want to clarify, it is the objective that is giving us strength. It is not the other way around. It is the objective that is giving us strength. So it's always important for us to wake up and center ourselves on the goal that we are involved in. What is it that we want to do with life? What are we doing? We are and having only one singular purpose. And that purpose is for us to be able to chant Harinam. We want to chant Premanam. We want to taste Nama in Prema. We want to attain Krishna Prema through the chanting of Harinam. So we are very eager to lend ourselves to the process of chanting Harinam. So that is our singular objective. Everything else is supposed to fix and help with that objective. That is why it becomes easy, if you are Krishna conscious, to manage regulative principles. If you're not Krishna conscious, and if you just want to do regulative principles for the purpose of the regulative principles or to attain something else, it's extraordinarily difficult, because it is external energy. It is the external energy of the Lord. You can't manage the external energy of the Lord. We cannot stay in the world and manage the external energy of the Lord. So we surrender to Harinam. By surrendering to Harinam and surrendering to Krishna and surrendering to the instructions of the Guru, regulative principles are also being given so that we could be more effective. That is the reason why regulative principles are needed. We need to be more effective in managing our time. We need to be more effective in managing the senses. We want the senses to be purified so that they could be used in the service of the Lord more effectively. And as a consequence, we have been given the regulative principles. Now, when we focus on that from the purpose, with the purpose of wanting to chant the pure name, wanting to serve Krishna more effectively, wanting to read Srimad Bhagavatam, then you have help. Yeah, otherwise it's very difficult to manage. So that's the point which we want to gain here. Because we are seeing stalwarts. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, you will see stalwarts, great personalities crumble under the pressure of the external energy. You'll see great personalities commit offenses which are just unthinkable for an average devotee. And then you'll wonder, how are they great? We forget that we are protected by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy. We forget that we are protected by the parampara. We forget that we are protected by Harinam. That is why what is almost impossible for anyone else is done within our movement. We are able to do what we are able to do because we have a lofty objective. I want to emphasize the reason we are receiving help is because we have a goal that is lofty. The whole body transforms itself to attain that goal. Yeah, we do not need to worry about the use of sexual energy for a higher purpose. We need to worry about wanting to chant nicely. We need to worry about wanting to follow the regulative principles nicely to please the Guru and Krishna so that our time is not wasted and we could use our energy and we could use our resources properly for the service of the Lord. Then everything else just falls in place quite easily. What is almost impossible is attained quite easily if the objective is Krishna, because then Krishna steps in. I just want to clarify that point because it's very important for us to understand is that we receive help because we have a very lofty objective. So it's needed for us to constantly revisit the objective. We need to constantly come and say that we have this transcendental objective of wanting to serve the Lord in Goloka. We want to basically chant Harinam. We want to chant the pure name. We want to experience what it is for us to be able to call upon Krishna as he would be called upon by the Vrajavasis. That is Shuddhanam. The Vrajavasis, when they call upon the name of Krishna, it is imbued with prema. They have intense prema, and that prema is manifested when they're calling upon the Lord. So we want to chant Krishna's names like a Vrajavasi. We want to be able to chant Krishna's names like Mother Yashoda. We want to be able to chant Krishna's names like Sridama and Sudama. His friends, we want to be able to call upon him as anybody else would in Braja. That is our objective. This is Premanam. That is Shuddhanam. Basically, there is no contamination whatsoever in their hearts about or misconceptions about whom they are calling upon. It's pure love. And as a consequence, service becomes extraordinarily powerful at that particular stage. Because when you are in love, then you have the ability to serve. Because that is basically bhakti. Bhakti is nothing but service, abhideya. Abhideya becomes very powerful when the sambandha is very powerful. And then one is able to attain the goal. One is able to render service in prema, and one is able to continue that service in prema even after discarding this body. So you learn how to serve in prema whilst being in this body, and then you give up the body and then continue serving in prema. So it's a transition that is already attained whilst being in the body. This is our goal. So we need to constantly focus on why we are doing what we are doing. And then what would happen is that every activity that we engage in becomes very easy. Otherwise, it's a very difficult issue. So we want to be very careful when we set objectives, because sometimes it's easy to get carried away because of our conditioning, that we are doing this because we want to perform austerities. We are doing this. Some people are like that. Yeah, some of us are like that. We have a propensity of wanting to engage in austerities. But the austerities are perfectly fine. But then if the objective is not to attain Krishna, but it is to project certain austerity, then that has no value. So some of us have the propensity of thinking that austerities are super important. Some of us have a propensity of thinking that nothing is important, so everything can be loose. There's no need of any rules and regulations. Both of these positions are flawed. They're very flawed, because in both positions, the objective is not to attain Krishna. So the idea is that we need to have the objective of prema. We want to chant prema nama, and then we drive back downward to see what is most appropriate as a lifestyle for us to be able to chant prema nama. What is an appropriate lifestyle? When do we eat? When do we sleep? When do we defend? And then what are the rules and regulations for coming in touch with the opposite gender? All of this is a subset of a greater objective of wanting to chant prema nama. The greater objective is what we need to constantly remind ourselves of. And then the smaller objectives become more clear, and we receive help to attain the smaller objectives. Because we do not want to think that it's possible for us to subjugate material nature. We cannot. We cannot. Great stalwarts have failed. They've fallen apart. And that's the example. And this was not even in Kali Yuga. This is in Satya Yuga. This is happening in Treta Yuga. This is happening in Dwapara. We are in Kali Yuga, and we are in one of the most degraded, I would say, circumstances of Kali Yuga. We are exposed to all kinds of degradation. So how do we even imagine to set an objective which is distinct from Krishna consciousness? Because that is what we have been given. We have been given a super easy way for us to lead life. If you have a singular objective of wanting to chant Premanam, everything else will just fall in place. And it is so easy, which is what was demonstrated by Haridas Thakur. Srila Haridas Thakur depended on Harinam. We will depend on Harinam. We will then look back and see what is life and what should life be for us to be able to chant Harinam. Then we start looking to see what is it that we can do to chant Harinam. So we re-engineer our future. We start aspiring for a certain kind of future. We start aspiring for a certain kind of service. We start aspiring for a certain kind of time availability so that we could have a better, more full, more, I would say, absorbed opportunity for service. Then what does happen is that everything else falls in place. So we want to kind of keep things in perspective, because as we go along, sometimes we may set objectives and we may even share this objective as being important in Krishna consciousness. But we want to understand that in Krishna consciousness, there's only one objective, and that is Harinam. For us to be able to chant the Premanam, for us to be able to fill our hearts with Prema so that we could distribute it to others. Because you cannot distribute what is not with us. How can you give something which is not within our hearts? How can you distribute something that is already not contained with us? How can you loan money if we are bankrupt? Yeah. If we do not have money, then what is it that we can actually loan? What is it that we can actually offer others? So we want to set the objectives right. And then once the objective is right, we want to follow through to see what is it that I can do to facilitate that objective. Then we receive help. So that's the object. That's basically the system that's being given. This is actually quite elaborately given in the Bhagavad Gita. 4.24. Yeah. 4.24 of the Bhagavad Gita. Brahmarpanam, Brahmahavir, Brahmagnau, Brahmanahutam, Brahmaiva tena gantavyam, Brahma karma samadhina. What does it mean? The translation is, a person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. So if the objective is to attain the spiritual kingdom, if the objective is to serve Krishna's names, we want to basically distribute Krishna's names as Mahaprabhu wanted. We want to chant Krishna's names so that we could distribute a higher quality of service and higher quality of our own Harinam. We could improve upon our situation. If that is the objective, then life in itself becomes an offering. And everything that is given to us is practically very much within the objective. As a consequence, we receive an immense amount of help in being able to do everything properly for Krishna's service. So we want to aspire for this. And we need to also understand that it cannot be two different objectives. There's only one objective. There's only one. There's nothing else. The objective is to chant Harinam and to chant Premanam. Now let's read the verses. And then as we read the verses of the 11th, 12th chapter, I will stop and give you a little bit of insight in terms of what's being given here. I'm starting with text 1 of creation of Kumāras and others. Sri Maitreya said, O learned Vidura, so far I have explained to you the glories of the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his feature of Kala. Now you can hear from me about the creation of Brahma, the reservoir of all Vedic knowledge. Text number 2. Brahma first created the nescient engagements such as self-deception, the sense of death, anger after frustration, the sense of false ownership, and the illusory bodily conception or forgetfulness of one's real identity. Yeah. So Lord Brahma first created all the nescience. Nescience was created first, which is the illusory aspects of life were created first, or the negativities were created first. Text 3. Seeing such a misleading creation as a sinful task, Brahma did not feel much pleasure in his activity, and therefore he purified himself by meditation on the personality of Godhead. Then he began another term of creation. See, this is very powerful because the potency of creation of Lord Brahma, the knowledge that he requires for creation, and everything else is manifested from the Lord based on the fruitive desires of the living entities who are to populate the worlds. At the end of creation, the living entities are submerged with the Lord. They are internally present. And at that point in time, their fruitive desires practically create a color upon the Lord, which is somewhat bluish. So there's tamas, which is created by the desires of the living entities who are a part of the Lord, which means that before manifesting them into the creation, they have all kinds of desires, and those desires have the ability to discolor the appearance of the Supreme Lord himself, which is described in the previous 2 chapters. And then Lord Brahma himself receives knowledge to facilitate and create the particular playground for these fruitive desires to manifest. Now, initially, when he starts out, he is creating nations, he is creating self-deception, he is creating all kinds of negative traits. How is he creating all of these? He is creating all of these because there are living entities who have these desires and who have such propensities. So he's practically facilitating such living entities. He is facilitating such living entities because there are living entities who are dominated by such negative qualities. And he is facilitating such creation. So he starts there first, and then he feels very despondent. He says, what am I doing? I'm starting with the bad side first. Yeah, I'm really starting with what is considered to be negative. It's nations. I must start with what can be considered positive. And what am I here to do? So he again goes back into meditation. And in a transcendental situation, he practically chants the name of Krishna, meditates on Krishna's form. And at that point in time, he begins creation again. And that is what is going to be described in the next few verses. Text 4. In the beginning, Brahma created 4 great sages named Sanaka, Sananda, Sanatana, and Sanat Kumāra. All of them were unwilling to adopt materialistic activities because they were highly elevated due to their semens flowing upward. Now, the semen flowing upward is, in Sanskrit, it's called Urdhva Reta. However, this is not a physical phenomenon. It is a phenomenon of consciousness where the objective of the Kumāras was so lofty that the entire potency of sexuality, which is basically is the same energy. You see, energy is the same, how you use it, because it can be transformed in different ways. And these are known in the Shastric literature. You can find this quite commonly in the Yoga Sutras, and you can find this quite commonly in so many different Puranas, is that the sexual potency and the sexual energy of creating the universe or engaging in the process of creation is the same potency that can be used for the purpose of elevating oneself spiritually, because everything requires energy. And if this passion and ignorance is transformed into goodness, that energy then is used in the service of the Lord. So what we see here is semen flowing upward, etc., is not a physical phenomenon. It simply is a phenomenon of consciousness where they basically have very transcendental objectives, on account of which their entire energy and their entire life force, the prana, is practically being dovetailed in the use of elevating themselves. Because prana, which is the life force, is what is required to procreate. So when someone is engaging in the process of procreation, they are giving their prana, their life force, and they are creating another life force. There's a displacement of life force from the parents onto the child, onto the progeny. So there is an energy transfer or prana that is being taken from the process of procreation to actually create and to bring forth progeny. Now, this is basically the same prana, which is life force, which is required for sadhana. Because how much prana one has and the quality of prana in terms of how vital they are can practically dictate the capacity for sadhana, the capacity to interact with the world, the capacity to absorb and remember scripture, the capacity to basically, engage with a large number of people and to influence the thought process of a large number of people. Yeah. To influence a large number of people and the thought process of a large number of people at a very subtle level to transform consciousness, that requires potency. It is the same potency. The sexual potency is the same potency, but it is used by the sages in a very transcendental way. So it's a transcendental shift. It is not a physical shift when it is being written that there is semen flowing upwards or semen flowing downwards. It is a matter of consciousness which drives the potency upward or the potency downward. When it is being driven downward, then people engage in sense gratification. Then there's a loss of prana, which means what could have been used for achieving great things is then given up for other aspects. Yeah. So there is practically a change in how one can use potency, and that is being described here, that these sages had an objective. Their objective was Krishna consciousness. It was all completely transcendental. Because it was transcendental, their potency and their prana, their ability to procreate, the ability that has already come with them, was actually being used for transcendental activity as opposed to wanting to bring forth progeny and engage in sex life. So that is being described here, which is quite powerful, which is the main topic that I spoke of earlier, saying you can't really get into a position of repression. You need to set an objective and focus on a loftier objective. As consciousness shifts from passion, ignorance to goodness, everything else falls in place. That is what is required by us. We need to have an objective that is transcendental, and then we need to have regulative principles that can help us get there. And then we are focusing on the transcendental objective all day. We are not focusing on the regulative principles. Neither are we focusing on what is lost and what is not being done. So this requires a loftier principle to be in place. And then the body and the psychology, the subtle body, the nadis, the nerves, and everything else, they start cooperating. And then resources that are available to us at a subtle level are made available to us for the purpose of achieving spiritual objectives rather than for us to engage in sense gratification. So this is a very important thing, because the reason is that there's only one set of resources. So it is not like you have an unlimited level of prana. Everybody has a limited quantity of prana. How do you develop it? How do you use it? That is what is being shown here. Here, practically, the sages, the four Kumāras, they chose not to participate in what we would call regular sex life and mundane activity. And they said, we want to transform ourselves and we want to engage in transcendence. So all they had, the resources that they had, was now being used for the purpose which was completely transcendental. So we need to set a purpose that is transcendental. If you have a transcendental purpose, and then you have regulative principles to assist you in the transcendental purpose, everything else needs to be done with that purpose and with the goal in mind. Then it falls in place, which is what is being demonstrated here. Text 5, Lord Brahma spoke to his sons after generating them. My dear sons, he said, now generate progeny. But due to their being attached to Vasudeva, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they aimed at liberation and therefore they expressed their unwillingness. Text 6. On the refusal of the sons to obey the order of their father, there was much anger generated in the mind of Brahma, which he tried to control and not express. So on the Kumāras, when they refused, Lord Brahma became angry. How do we manage this? Why are you refusing me? I'm your father, I'm your authority. And then that anger practically that was generated, he could not express it and he tried to control it. Text 7. Although he tried to curb his anger, it came out from between his eyebrows, and a child mixed blue and red was immediately generated. See, that was the potency of Lord Brahma, that if he becomes angry, he's going to produce progeny. Yeah, because he is the creator. He has got so much potency that all he has to do is he becomes angry, And then from between his eyebrows, the spot between the eyebrows is called Bruvor Madhye. Madhya is center, Bruvor is basically the eyebrows. Bruvor Madhye, that area is where what we would normally call the chakras are. And that area basically became quite filled with anger, because that's where anger is expressed. Yeah, because sometimes you see when people are angry, they cross their eyebrows. Yeah, so basically that's the spot where there's anger. And then from that spot, which is between the eyebrows, a child came into being, and the color of the child was red and blue. Yeah, these are like the shots which boxers wear. It's a very famous example where you'll find boxers going after each other. Actually, it's a very brutal sport where they try knocking each other down, bloodying each other's face. And you find that very famously, they wear a blue and they wear a red shorts. Yeah, you wear those. And this is basically to engage in activities which is filled with all kinds of mode of ignorance, anger. And then they want, without anger, how do you go onto the ring and box and then punch someone else's face? You need anger. So all the mode of ignorance is expressed in the blue and red mixture, which is coming out now. And he is a child with blue and red was immediately generated from Lord Brahma's anger. After his birth, he began to cry. And what did he cry? He said, "O destiny maker, teacher of the universe, kindly designate my name and place." Rudra, Rud means to cry. Rudra is definitely a definition of, one definition is, this is a personality who is going to cry. Yeah, because Rud means to cry. So the moment he was manifested, he started crying. The all-powerful Brahma, who was born from the lotus flower, pacified the boy with gentle words, accepting his request, and said, "Do not cry. I shall certainly do as you desire." Thereafter, Brahma said, "O chief of the demigods, you shall be called by the name Rudra by all people because you have so anxiously cried." Crying is Rudra. And then when Lord Shiva destroys the body, everybody at home is also lamenting, they're crying. So there's Rudra when you come in touch with Rudra. Yeah. So there's a lot of crying when you come in touch with, when Rudra departs, because what is being held together is being removed. So the body collapses, and then you have everybody at home lamenting because the person has departed. The body is destroyed. My dear boy, I have already selected the following places for your residence: the heart, the senses, the air of life, the sky, the air, the fire, water, earth, sun, moon, and austerity. Lord Brahma said, "My dear boy Rudra, you have 11 other names: Manyu, Manu, Mahinasha, Mahan, Shiva, Ritadvaja, Ugrareta, Bhava, Kala, Vamadeva, and Dritavrata. O Rudra, you also have 11 wives called the Rudranis, and they are as follows: Di, Dhriti, Rasala, Uma, Niyut, Sarpi, Ila, Ambika, Airavati, Swada, and Diksha. My dear boy, you may now accept all the names and places designated for you and your different wives. And since you are now one of the masters of the living entities, you may increase the population on a large scale." The most powerful Rudra, whose bodily color was blue mixed with red, created many offspring exactly resembling him in features, strength, and furious nature. The sons and grandsons generated by Rudra were unlimited in number, and when they assembled together, they attempted to devour the entire universe. When Brahma, the father of the living entities, saw this, he became afraid of the situation. Brahma told Rudra, "O best among the demigods, there's no need for you to generate living entities of this nature. They have begun to devastate everything on all sides with the fiery flames from their eyes, and they have even attacked me. My dear son, you had better situate yourself in penance, which is auspicious for all living entities, and which will bring all benediction upon you. By penance only shall you be able to create the universe as it was before. By penance only can one even approach the personality of Godhead, who is within the heart of every living entity, and at the same time beyond the reach of all senses. Sri Maitreya said, thus Rudra, having been ordered by Brahma, circumambulated his father, the master of the Vedas. Addressing him with words of assent, he entered the forest to perform austere penances. Now, we need to understand that this is not Lord Shiva. There is a distinction between the Rudra generated between the eyebrows of Lord Brahma and the personality of Godhead, Lord Shiva, who is the Gunavatar. He is also basically the expansion of Krishna, who is neither Jiva Tattva, neither is he Vishnu Tattva, he is in between. The personalities that we're talking about here, the Rudras, who have been generated from between the eyebrows of Lord Brahma, they carry the potency of Lord Shiva of destruction, but they're Jiva Tattva. They are not Shiva Tattva, they are not Shiva. So we should not mistake this as the quality of Lord Shiva. He is not in ignorance. Lord Shiva is not in the mode of ignorance. Yeah, neither should we assume that he is subservient to Lord Brahma creating him. He is not. He is superior to Lord Brahma by station because he is actually not Jiva. He has greater qualities than Jiva Tattva. Lord Brahma normally is Jiva. Yeah. So the Jiva has 50 qualities in full. Lord Shiva has 55 qualities in full. Sorry, when the Jiva appears as Brahma, it has that personality has 50 qualities to the largest extent possible for a Jiva to have. When someone is basically talking about Lord Shiva, you're talking about 55 qualities. And then Lord Narayan is 60 qualities, Krishna is 64 qualities in absolute measure. So we should understand that what is being described here as Rudra is a manifestation of personalities who carry the potency of Lord Shiva. They have the ability to cause destruction. They have the ability to cause the mode of ignorance to come upon the world. But they are not actually the same as Lord Shiva. So we want to distinguish the two. Now, what is it which is being instructed to them? They're being instructed to meditate on Krishna. Especially they are being instructed to meditate on Sankarshana. They are being instructed to meditate on Sankarshana. They are being instructed to, he is being instructed, Rudra is being instructed to meditate on Krishna as Sankarshana so that he could actually attain the quality of Shiva. Lord Shiva is in Haradam, which is even higher in the hierarchy than Satyaloka, which is within the universe. He is even higher. So Lord Shiva, the expansions that are coming out from between the eyebrows of Lord Brahma, Rudras, they are not Lord Shiva by personality. These are empowered aspects of Lord Shiva's potency. They are Jiva Tattva, but then they are basically empowered. They're empowered. They're empowered by Lord Shiva. So there's a similarity in terms of the action. There's a similarity in terms of the description, but this is not Lord Shiva as we would know. That personality is going to be described throughout Srimad Bhagavatam. Yeah, that personality is going to be described throughout Srimad Bhagavatam. You have to understand the distinction between the two because there's a lot of confusion because when you use the word, because one can have the potency of Lord Shiva, but then one doesn't become Lord Shiva. So in this particular personality, whoever is created by Lord Brahma due to his anger, you can't really say that is Lord Shiva. This is basically the Rudra principle. And this is Rudra who is created. But this Rudra himself has the potency of Lord Shiva. And as a consequence, he can destroy. Text 21. Brahma, who was empowered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, thought of generating living entities and begot 10 sons for the extension of the generations. So, Marichi, Atri, Angira, Pulastya, Pulaha, Kratu, Brigu, Vasishta, Daksha, and the 10th son, Narada, were thus born. Narada was born from the deliberation of Brahma, which is the best part of his body. Vasishta was born from his breathing. Daksha from a thumb, Brigu from his touch, and Kratu from his hand. Now, there's an interesting statement here. Sri Narada was born from the deliberation of Lord Brahma. What is deliberation? Deliberation that is being spoken of here is where Lord Brahma is actually meditating on Krishna. So when Lord Brahma is transcendentally situated, the progeny that is born is Sri Narad Muni. When Lord Brahma is transcendentally situated, the progeny that is coming forth is Sri Narad Muni. So that is why Sri Narad Muni is the avatar. He is a Satyavesha avatar. He's practically an avatar who carries the potency of bhakti, and he can deliver Krishna bhakti to anyone. So you see him throughout Srimad Bhagavatam, anyone of any particular means who has achieved anything, including Srila Vyasadeva, has come in touch with Sri Narad Muni. So this Narad Muni came into being during the transcendental situation of Lord Brahma, so his deliberation. So Lord Brahma's deliberation upon Krishna and the transcendental activities of the Lord produced progeny, which is Narad Muni. So that is why he is considered to be the supermost, or I would say, the best among all the progeny, simply because he can deliver one to the lotus feet of Krishna. Text 24. Pulastya was generated from the ears, Angira from the mouth, Atri from the eyes, Marichi from the mind, and Pulaha from the navel of Brahma. Religion was manifested from the breast of Brahma, wherein is seated the Supreme Personality of Godhead Narayana. And irreligion appeared from his back, where horrible death takes place for the living entity. Okay, I'm going to stop here beyond verse 25, because the verses after this would require a little more explanation. And I want to give half hour for questions, because that is pretty much the time I have today, which is until next half hour. So I'll stop here and I'll quickly summarize, and then I'll open up for questions. So we are on verse 25. We will conclude the chapter in the following week, but I will summarize before we move forward. So the theme that we chose to explain this chapter was the idea of procreation, the idea of engaging in activity. Procreation, or the creative potency, being able to engage in this world, all of these fall in the same category because they all present an opportunity to come in touch fully with the mode of passion. And when one comes in touch with mode of passion, there's a certain danger of falling into the mode of ignorance. And the mode of ignorance particularly means that life is lost, it's over. So as a consequence, one needs to have a very lofty objective, and one needs to constantly center themselves on the objective of life. You need to constantly revisit what is life. You need to revisit what is the objective of life on a daily basis, so that we will know that everything we are doing has the purpose of attaining the objective. When you have a transcendental objective, we just noticed, when Lord Brahma has a transcendental meditation, he's producing a child like Sri Narad Muni. What does it mean? It means that if we have a transcendental objective, our life will produce aspects or extensions of ourselves in terms of where we are, the kind of facilities, what kind of association, what kind of resources, etc. All of this would be produced by the objective. By being transcendentally situated, Lord Brahma manifests Sri Narad Muni. By being transcendentally focused in terms of our objective, we will actually create a future which has resources that are directly manifesting for the purpose of aiding us in our objective. And we would have very little distraction. We would have the ability to move forward. So the idea is that one needs to have a transcendental objective. If you have a transcendental objective, then everything else can be deliberated and can kind of focus on trying to say that you're trying to achieve the transcendental objective on account of which you are engaging in some activity. This is very important. So the first verses of this particular chapter, we saw the description of the concept of celibacy, the concept of abstinence, the concept of the Urdhvareta, which is basically the 4 Kumāra brothers being perfect celibates to the point where their whole procreative potency was actually aiding them in spiritual transcendental activity. So we wanted to clarify that it is not so much of physical posturing through yoga. It is not so much some kind of physical posturing or doing some austerity, doing some kind of, I would say, tapasya or austerity or some kind of mantra, etc., for the purpose of maintaining celibacy and maintaining abstinence, etc. What is it which has been needed here? What is the focus? The focus here is that if you have a transcendental objective, life is going to go towards that objective. We will have people around us who have similar objectives. When we are engaging in the chanting of the Maha Mantra will create a society around us. Have you noticed this? Every one of us have seen this. Once you begin chanting Harinam, you are surrounded by people in a short while of a certain kind of nature. You're surrounded by people with certain objectives. Not everybody surrounds us. You have certain kind of people who surround us. We end up going to certain places. We come in touch with certain kind of ideals. We lead a certain kind of life. Eating, sleeping, mating, defending, everything becomes adjusted according to Harinam. Have you noticed the fact that the Maha Mantra practically has created a future for us? Imagine being able to invest our entire energy into wanting to chant Shuddhanam. What kind of a future would we be able to manifest for ourselves, which will be so glorious and so auspicious if the only objective is to chant Shuddhanam? I want to chant Shuddhanam. I want to chant Premanam. I want to serve Srimad Bhagavatam. I want to serve the devotees. I want to serve the Dham. I want to serve the deities. What happens with these objectives is that we start creating a certain kind of life with these objectives. Because we all have creative potency and we are all engaging at some level in spiritual activity. Spiritual activity produces resources that we cannot see, but it does not manifest, but it is still there. Spiritual activity produces resources. Those resources themselves have to combine with proper desires, and then a future is created. So it's very important for us to understand that revisiting the objective of life is very important for us. Centering ourselves is very important because we could be distracted by too much austerity. We could be distracted with too little austerity. And then we could find ourselves in a compromised situation because we have put too much energy into an area which is not required, or we have put too little energy when there was more required. So if we constantly focus on trying to attain a transcendental objective and we are chanting Harinam, we will be manifesting a future. And that is super important for us because we would practically be creating a future that is going to aid in further chanting of Harinam, which is what Lord Brahma is demonstrating. Initially, he starts out for the sake of creating, and then he finds that he is creating all kinds of negative qualities. He stops that and says, oh, I don't want to do it. Then he starts meditating on the transcendental nature of the Lord. Then he begins creation again. And this time he is manifesting an extraordinary group of people, which is the Kumāras. And then when they refuse him, he becomes angry. And then the Rudra comes out from between his eyebrows. So what do we notice? We are actually seeing that this potency of practically manifesting experiences is also within us. If we don't have transcendental objectives and we are chanting Harinam, we are worshipping the deities, we're coming in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam, we are actually manifesting a certain reality of life, which sometimes doesn't work for us. Yeah, we need to ensure that we have objectives in place. We need to revisit those objectives. We need to constantly understand why we are doing what we are doing and then move forward. This is basically I would say, the thrust of the discussion today. We'll continue again next week, but I'll take questions. I have around 30 minutes to go.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you. Wonderful points that you've made, and it's really inspiring. Earlier, you mentioned about this austerity. See, in Krishna consciousness, you have so many varieties of devotees who do different things, and one of the things that really comes out in Srila Prabhupada's in talks and lectures is the issue about passing this culture on to others, passing this whole philosophy, ideas on to others about what Krishna consciousness is and how it is to be adopted. But sometimes we get into this, even in devotional life, we get into so many rituals about how to, just rituals about personal cultivation and development and things. But we kind of, sometimes it gets a bit lost. It appears a bit lost, where we don't actually have another generation that we pass it on to. So it becomes a sort of like you said, about this cultivating for the sake of cultivating, as opposed to actually really desiring to give it to others because of the benefits you've seen yourself, and you've seen the essence of what this human form of life actually is, and how it can easily, nicely help others. So what are your thoughts in terms of how to develop others and to set ourselves those not just goals personally, but also the lofty goals of actually giving it to others, actually helping others to, develop changes in their life if they wish to progress. But first of all, being able to see that in yourself as someone who's practicing consciousness.
Okay.
Real, that creating step changes in ourselves, so that there is actually, that movement in terms of giving to others.
Sure.
How can it be adopted, so that becomes a normal thing, as opposed to something we do, in years to come. It becomes a normal thing right now that we actually cultivate it in such a way that we actually give it to others as quite naturally, quite easily. How can that be developed?
Yes, basically, the idea of wanting to be used as an instrument in the movement of Lord Chaitanya, it requires two qualities. One is compassion, and the other is humility. And humility and compassion are both derivatives of Harinam. The more deeper one goes into Harinam, the quality of compassion will come forth. It's just a matter of, I would say, being able to chant Harinam very deeply and being able to be very serious about the chanting of Harinam and absorbed in Harinam. It will give us the quality of compassion, and it will also be allowing us and gifting us with humility. Now, when one has humility, but they have a lot of compassion, then they reflect on the fact that they really can't give even though they want to give. Because without humility, they will think that they have enough for them to be able to do what is necessary. But with humility, they will know that, yes, I have compassion and I want to do things, but I don't have the capacity to do so because I'm very unqualified. And this is such a powerful gift that I'm very unqualified to be able to share this gift with others. So there is humility and then there's compassion. Both are gifts of Harinam. And then when Krishna sees in our hearts that there's a lot of compassion of wanting to assist others and wanting to deliver the message to others, and when he sees that there's also humility, which means we have the ability to receive help from Krishna, then Krishna will step in and empower us. That's why we notice that there's a certain sense of helplessness which is seen in the writings of our predecessor acharyas. Even Srila Prabhupada, when he was traveling to America, when he was reaching the Boston Harbor, he was talking about how he was actually meditating. He was offering this prayer on the Jaladuta, the famous Jaladuta prayers, of how he could give this very, very sublime topic to those who are completely enmeshed in passion and ignorance, because he doesn't have the capacity to do so. So there was this deep compassion of wanting to do so, but then there was a helplessness of feeling unqualified to be able to do so. So this is a gift of Harinam. This particular state is a gift of Harinam. And when one feels that way, they become empowered by Krishna himself because they are candidates for power. You see, if you feel that you can give, then you don't need Krishna. But then if you feel that you want to give, but you don't have anything to give, but it is more a natural state due to advanced Krishna consciousness, then Krishna steps in and uses us as instruments. So if we want to really make a difference, then we need to start with ourselves and very specifically focus on quality chanting so that the compassion that pours forth is combined with humility. And then Krishna will use us. It's just a matter of time as we cultivate and become ready for the mission. It's just a matter of time. So that's the message I have, in terms of the answer, the response to your question.
Thank you, Prabhu. That's very nice. Thank you. That's very insightful. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Okay, so I have a few questions on chat. So let me just see what they have. My question is that when I have desire to serve, those thoughts will come up when I'm chanting. So how to get free of this habit so that I can concentrate better? So the question is, I have certain desires to serve, and those thoughts of wanting to serve start coming up during the process of chanting. See, this issue is not as big an issue as it would be if the objectives that were coming up during chanting are not related to service. But how do you handle this? The way you handle it is that you take action steps of wanting to serve. You see, convert your thoughts to action. Put down a plan, take small steps, take big steps, find out what you can do today, find out what you can do for the week, for the month, for the year, and then start moving towards it after chanting. Then the chanting process itself becomes a meditation on being able to serve. So that's how I would do it. I would basically take action so that it doesn't remain at the level of thoughts. And then chanting can practically empower us with a greater level of clarity on how we could serve in those capacities. Now, I have another question here. I was wondering, I know we chant for Krishna, but can we also chant the Mahamantra for the benefit of others on the path? And maybe on behalf of those who are not on the path, but are dear ones, for some good blessings to reach them? Now, in reality, when we chant and when we call upon Harinam, we are coming in touch with Krishna. Because this is a bona fide process. This is the only bona fide process. Japa, mantra, calling upon the names of God is the bona fide process for this particular yuga. So as a consequence, what we are doing with chanting is we are coming in touch with Krishna because the sound vibration of Krishna is not different from Krishna. And we are coming in touch with him. So when we come in touch with him, we are practically attaining his quality. This is a path that we have chosen to attain the Krishna conscious quality. You see, notice that our movement is the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So we are practically trying to attain the qualitative oneness with Krishna by coming in touch with him in the form of Harinam. So when we do chant, we are glorifying Krishna, but we are also attaining the quality of Krishna by coming in touch with Krishna. And that is the most effective way for us to dislodge ourselves from the influence of material energy. We need Krishna's potency, so we are coming in touch with it. Can this be used for the benefit of others on the path? Of course, we can always make a sankalpa. We can request the Lord to bless someone whom we feel require help, and then we could chant a few extra rounds for them. We could do that. We could chant specific amount of quantity of japa purely for the benefit or the well-being of others. We can do that. That is not an issue at all. But one has to realize that we need to also do what is required for ourselves before we can assist others. So it is like saying that we need to basically save ourselves so that we can save others. It's like someone has to swim, from the current and onto the shore before they can throw a rope onto others. So we need to have both mindsets in place. Yes, we need to do things for ourselves where we are doing our japa, then we chant more for the benefit of those whom we believe should benefit from this. So we can offer this to the benefit of others. Yes, we can request the Maha Mantra, we can request Krishna in the form of Harinam to reach those souls whom we feel need help. Absolutely. Okay, there's a question. How the principle of semen flowing upward is applicable to women? Yeah. How the principle of semen flowing upward, because there is a verse, which is the second verse, which talks about the Kumāras, and the Kumāras are basically called Urdhva-reta, and they're using this particular expression of the Urdhva-reta, which is a semen flowing upwards. And I explained the fact that it is not physical, it is a transcendental state where the objective of transcendence is in the mind. So all the resources that have been given to them, which also includes the creative potency, is being used with a transcendental objective in mind. The same is applicable regardless of the body. Yeah, even if someone is in a woman's body, then it is definitely more applicable, because then they have a lot of creative potency. As a consequence, they need basically also to have a transcendental objective. By having a transcendental objective, this creative potency then goes towards aiding towards that particular objective. So that's how it's going to work. Okay, any other question or comment?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, does that mean for men also, is it not about losing the semen or only about the consciousness? Because
yes,
there is a lot of importance on not losing semen, right, for men.
Correct. See, the point is, can you put yourself on mute because I'm echoing? Thank you. The point is that even before one engages in the act of procreation, the mind has already been extraordinarily absorbed in such a thought. So it is not spontaneous. The mind is filled with all kinds of thoughts, and then one finds an opportunity to engage in activities of sense gratification. So there's a loss of consciousness that occurs even before the actual act of engaging in the act of procreation, engaging in the act of sex. You see, there's a lot of thought that goes on. So the real definition of Naistika Brahmachari, which is, basically Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur was Naistika Brahmachari. The real definition is that even a thought doesn't come of wanting to engage in sense gratification. So the point is that you don't engage in that activity. It's as simple as that, even at a mental level. And you have a transcendental objective. And because of which, then one doesn't worry about the physical aspect of it, because for the physical to happen, first there has to be mental absorption. So you can't really have mental absorption being completely free and then one engages in the physical activity. That doesn't work. So we're talking about the fact that if transcendental consciousness is present, then one doesn't basically focus on, losing anything. That's the point.
Yes, bro, that's true, bro. But it's very difficult, even though we know these principles, and knowingly or unknowingly, we come across so many things, even though we avoid media also. Sometimes it's very subtle that even if we avoid consciously all these, sometimes it comes in dreams, and there is possibility of losing semen too. So what do you comment on that?
There are different reasons for it. Perhaps we could take it, you could write me on WhatsApp and I could communicate with you. But the point is, again, the same thing. More importantly, the most important aspect to it is the fact that there has to be a proper diet and there has to be a transcendental objective. Then for most part, we are covered. The proper diet essentially is prasadam, not just vegetarian, vegan diet, but it is prasadam. If food that we eat is properly offered, then it takes away so much away from us in terms of troubles. So a lot has to do with what we eat, and a lot has to do with, coming in touch with stimulus and so on and so forth, but a lot has to do with what we eat. So if we eat properly in terms of prasadam, then the problems do go away. Yeah. That's what is required. It is difficult, but it needs to be done as a matter of understanding that eating practically prashadam and being able to chant and having transcendental objectives and association, all of this matter. But at the same time, we want to understand that it is a matter of consciousness. It is not just a matter of repression. That is the point I wanted to make.
Yes, thank you. Hare Krishna.
Sure. Sure. Any other question? We have 10 more minutes if anybody has a question or comment. Okay. So I don't see any more questions. So we'll end today's discussion and we meet again next week. Thank you very much for joining me. We'll conclude chapter 12 of Canto 3 in our next meeting. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.